On June 6, 1944, gray light emerged slowly across the Normandy coastline, revealing German positions stretched thinly along cliffs, dunes, and fortified concrete emplacements facing the channel. Each soldier sensed uneasy tension while scanning the horizon because earlier intelligence suggested nothing unusual despite rising operational uncertainty. Many garrisons remained undermanned since senior commanders believed strong tides and predicted storms reduced probabilities of immediate amphibious assault. Quiet conversations faded as distant rumbling vibrations reached forward trenches, signaling movement inconsistent with routine maritime patrols previously monitored. Within minutes, the magnitude of approaching forces surpassed imagination, confronting defenders with overwhelming formations advancing steadily toward their defensive arcs. Lookouts reported countless silhouettes spreading across the dark waters, identifying them as warships, transports, and specialized landing craft gathering into coordinated assault waves. The sheer number defied established expectations created through years of propaganda emphasizing Atlantic Wall impregnability across occupied Europe. Soldiers stationed within bunkers realized the approaching fleet possessed industrial strength exceeding any capacity Germany could match under collapsing wartime conditions. Coastal artillery crews prepared firing solutions urgently, calculating trajectories amidst pressure mounting quickly across all defensive sectors. Radios crackled with fragmented transmissions, revealing commanders struggling to maintain coherent control amid unprecedented enemy concentration. Explosions erupted as naval guns opened fire simultaneously, unleashing destructive ordnance that shook reinforced positions with violent concussive force. Sand, smoke, and shattered concrete filled air within defensive emplacements, overwhelming senses of soldiers forced to navigate debris under sustained bombardment. Observation slits revealed battleships delivering precise salvos, their shells carving craters across terrain designed originally to impede advancing infantry. German gunners attempted counter-battery fire despite immense shock effects impairing targeting equipment essential for coordinated coastal defense operations. Many communication lines collapsed instantly, isolating individual strongpoints unable to request reinforcements or relay immediate battlefield assessments. When bombardment eased briefly, defenders witnessed landing craft advancing through surf in dense formations shaped by meticulous Allied planning. Machine gunners prepared weapons at predetermined arcs, understanding their survival depended on disciplined fire delivered against overwhelming numbers. The scale of the assault demonstrated Allied commitment beyond any previous engagement, exposing limitations inherent within German fortifications constructed hastily under resource scarcity. Infantry units braced themselves as first-wave soldiers approached through rising smoke and turbulent water, carrying determination forged through extensive preparation unmatched by defenders. German confidence eroded rapidly as reality replaced ideological conviction, revealing operational vulnerabilities previously concealed by strategic optimism. Across the coastline, soldiers confronted the stark realization that the Atlantic Wall never possessed the capacity to halt industrially sustained invasion forces. Their initial belief in unassailable defensive structures dissolved under relentless enemy momentum, shaped by naval superiority and numerical dominance. The dawn of June 6 reshaped perceptions permanently, demonstrating that Germany faced adversaries capable of assembling logistical power beyond imagining. Through smoke drifting inland, Wehrmacht defenders sensed transformation unfolding, signifying beginning stages of a campaign destined to determine fate of occupied Europe decisively. The forward slopes of WN-62 overlooked the expanse of Omaha Beach, providing German defenders with commanding fields of fire across approaching surf. Heinrich Severloh prepared his MG-42 carefully, understanding its reliability offered one of the few advantages available that morning. He checked ammunition belts repeatedly, ensuring each link remained clean despite heavy humidity drifting across sand dunes that surrounded the fortified position. Nearby riflemen monitored the horizon anxiously, because early bombardment had suggested an assault force far greater than earlier estimates indicated. When Allied landing craft emerged through lifting smoke, Severloh recognized their immense number instantly, realizing the first wave carried strength beyond anticipated projections. The machine gun's barrel glinted faintly within the bunker, representing the focal point of German resistance against overwhelming maritime formations. Naval shells continued detonating across the hillside, shaking the emplacement violently, producing dust clouds that coated optics and complicated immediate defensive readiness. Severloh steadied his position despite concussive blasts, acknowledging bombardment intended to neutralize strongpoints before infantry reached deadly fields of fire. As first ramps dropped, he squeezed the trigger, releasing a torrent of rounds consistent with the weapon's unparalleled cyclic rate. The MG-42's recoil vibrated through the mount, providing grim reminder of its designed purpose within defensive doctrines shaped by earlier campaigns. Each belt disappeared rapidly, requiring supporting soldiers to feed ammunition continuously, their movements practiced after months spent drilling under tightening supply conditions. Severloh shifted fire systematically across advancing troops, following trained arcs intended to break cohesion before momentum could develop along the shoreline. The beach transformed into chaos immediately, because deep water, heavy equipment, and intense incoming fire created devastating obstacles for advancing units. Severloh observed waves of soldiers struggling through surf while explosions lifted sand violently, illustrating shock experienced by assault formations facing prepared defenses. Smoke thickened around the position as American destroyers maneuvered dangerously close, delivering direct fire intended to neutralize entrenched machine guns. Severloh and nearby defenders endured near misses relentlessly. Understanding continued resistance required composure under pressure levels exceeding all previous battlefield experiences. Despite temporary survival of WN-62, defenders realized the assault scale guaranteed eventual overrunning once successive waves gained steady footholds across beach sectors. Severloh continued firing until ammunition diminished, recognizing moment approaching when defensive positions would collapse beneath Allied numerical and material superiority. The early morning chaos shattered the functioning rhythm usually maintained within German command structures, limiting coordinated responses that previously defined defensive efficiency. Officers attempted to interpret fragmented reports quickly, yet communication disruptions prevented clarity, creating hesitation precisely when decisive reactions were essential. Field telephones malfunctioned repeatedly due to bombardment damage, forcing messengers to carry updates slowly across dangerous terrain, delaying vital directives significantly. Each delay compounded confusion further, because commanders lacked accurate knowledge of landing strength, ship concentrations, or precise breakthrough points forming across beaches. Rommel's absence introduced devastating leadership gaps, since his operational instincts emphasized swift counterattacks designed to disrupt infantry buildup before armor deployment. With him away visiting Germany, responsibility shifted to staff officers less aggressive temperamentally, reducing likelihood of immediate counterstroke against expanding Allied footholds. Von Rundstedt received alarming reports indicating assault size far exceeded reconnaissance predictions, prompting urgent calls requesting panzer deployment authorization immediately. High Command hesitated because Hitler insisted reserve armor remain under his exclusive control, preventing rapid commitment during crucial opening hours. Orders eventually filtered downward slowly, containing contradictory instructions created by conflicting assumptions regarding Allied intentions along broader Channel coastline. Some messages suggested secondary landings probable elsewhere, compelling commanders to retain divisions unnecessarily instead of reinforcing crumbling sectors near Omaha Beach. Meanwhile, officers near frontline positions struggled directing scattered battalions, effectively because radio frequencies remained overwhelmed by interference caused by naval bombardment intensity. Without stable communications, unit leaders improvised reactions individually, weakening cohesion exactly when unified action offered final chance for containment. General Marx attempted establishing operational overview from his headquarters, but reports arrived disjointed, exaggerating casualties in some areas while minimizing dangers elsewhere. This inconsistent picture impeded his ability to determine whether breakthroughs represented isolated incidents or represented coordinated Allied strategy. Panzer Division prepared for movement cautiously, hindered by destroyed roads, disrupted rail lines, and constant fear of Allied fighter-bomber attacks above. Their delayed arrival eliminated possibility of concentrated armored counterattack, confirming strategic paralysis, already undermining chances for shoreline defense success. Hitler slept through initial landings, and staff refused waking him due to long-standing fear regarding unpredictable decisions issued hastily. This leadership vacuum extended delays critically, ensuring panzers remained idle during hours when Allied beachheads remained fragile. As chaos expanded across Normandy, German commanders recognized collapse of coordinated defense resulted from structural rigidity, disrupted communications, and absence of decisive leadership. Each passing hour strengthened Allied momentum irreversibly, confirming German failure originated within their own delayed decision-making rather than frontline resistance alone. The German defenders watching the horizon at dawn confronted a sight exceeding every prior assumption, because no intelligence predicted an armada approaching with unprecedented magnitude. Across the mist-filled Channel waters, thousands of silhouettes emerged steadily, creating an expanding wall of steel that transformed calm seas into overwhelming testimony of Allied industrial superiority. The sheer number of vessels produced psychological shock instantly, because coastal observers realized defensive firepower could not counter simultaneous threats arriving from every direction. Frigates, destroyers, cruisers, and battleships maneuvered with disciplined precision, coordinating bombardment patterns calculated meticulously to suppress German fortifications before infantry approached vulnerable shoreline sectors. Every strongpoint, including reinforced concrete casemates considered nearly invulnerable, shuddered violently as naval guns delivered continuous barrages, collapsing firing positions and severing communication lines essential for organized defensive responses. Batteries positioned inland attempted returning fire briefly. However, Allied spotters corrected salvos rapidly, neutralizing artillery pieces that previously anchored Atlantic Wall doctrine and eliminating illusion of lasting resistance potential. The German troops inside observation posts struggled maintaining situational awareness, because smoke, dust, and splintering debris obscured coastline visibility completely during crucial early minutes of the assault. Attempts to identify landing craft formations failed repeatedly, since waves of approaching vessels blended into dense clouds generated by overlapping bombardments that masked infantry movements effectively. Younger conscripts manning machine gun nests experienced sensory disorientation immediately, because ground vibrations from naval fire disrupted balance, hearing, and coordination essential for accurate defensive targeting. Even veteran NCOs accustomed to Eastern Front barrages acknowledged unprecedented intensity, recognizing Allies intended not merely softening defenses but annihilating resistance systematically before soldiers reached beaches. Command posts attempted transmitting status updates, yet repeated cable failures rendered many outposts isolated, forcing officers to act without broader operational understanding necessary for coordinated countermeasures. Forward observers positioned along cliffs abandoned traditional spotting procedures entirely, because bombardment patterns changed faster than communication teams could relay location adjustments effectively. Some concrete shelters cracked under pressure, allowing shock waves to pass through internal chambers where troops braced instinctively despite knowledge structural failure remained unavoidable. Engineers tasked with maintaining barrier obstacles faced insurmountable conditions, since explosives designed to disrupt incoming craft detonated prematurely under heavy bombardment pressure. As the Armada continued advancing, landing craft lowered ramps methodically, demonstrating Allies possessed not only overwhelming numbers but extraordinary logistical synchronization essential for successful large-scale amphibious operations. German defenders increasingly recognized their pre-war assumptions regarding Atlantic Wall impregnability relied on outdated models incapable of resisting coordinated firepower, delivered across unprecedented naval spectrum. Each minute of sustained bombardment widened psychological fractures already present within Wehrmacht units, intensifying fear while eliminating possibility of restoring defensive cohesion once infantry waves finally appeared. The realization spread rapidly that Allied naval supremacy presented decisive strategic advantage, rendering localized heroism irrelevant against machinery capable of reshaping coastline geography instantly. By the time bombardment lifted, German soldiers understood battle outcome had shifted permanently, because overwhelming naval force shattered every expectation upon which their confidence once depended. The defenders positioned along Omaha Beach confronted an environment collapsing minute by minute, because the terrain they trusted for protection transformed rapidly under relentless Allied pressure. Inside the concrete bunkers overlooking the tidal flats, German troops endured concussive shockwaves that traveled through reinforced walls, shaking firing ports violently despite their careful engineering. Machine gun teams attempted maintaining overlapping fields of fire, however drifting smoke, drifting sand, and relentless suppressive bombardment disrupted visibility essential for coordinated engagement. Every emplacement along the bluffs depended on predetermined kill zones, Yet rising chaos prevented proper execution because assault waves refused collapsing under expected casualty projections. Minefields arranged painstakingly along the approach routes detonated sporadically, creating temporary obstacles but failing to halt Allied advances because engineers cleared breaches with remarkable determination. The pillboxes situated near the draws suffered critical disorientation, as communication lines severed by naval gunfire prevented officers from adjusting firing solutions rapidly enough for shifting targets. Infantry trapped within enclosed positions felt mounting psychological strain, because their weapons delivered high rates of fire without reducing enemy momentum perceptibly across widening sectors. Grenadiers attempting counterfire from open trenches faced immediate suppression, since destroyers positioned offshore detected flashes quickly and delivered precise retaliatory salvos. The first American waves experienced devastating casualties, yet their persistence shocked defenders, because no prior engagement demonstrated such sustained willingness to endure concentrated lethal firepower. Reinforced concrete shelters became claustrophobic under pressure, as dust, fumes, and structural vibrations created confusion that multiplied faster than officers could re-establish control. Attempts to coordinate defensive artillery fire collapsed comprehensively because forward observers lost both instruments and communication equipment necessary for effective adjustment. Hidden mortar pits offered intermittent support. However, Allied spotting aircraft corrected counter-battery fire with alarming speed that neutralized indirect fire positions systematically. German troops monitoring waterline progress realized tidal conditions increasingly favored attackers, because obstacles exposed during earlier hours provided diminishing impediment once waves advanced steadily. When American assault teams reached shingle banks, defenders recognized new danger, since infantry now used terrain folds for temporary cover, enabling reorganized pushes toward bluffs. Bunkers, with narrow firing apertures, suffered degraded accuracy, as smoke from internal gun barrels combined with external dust reducing visibility nearly to zero. Mine detonations continued intermittently behind advancing units, yet their patterns no longer corresponded with defensive plans because attackers moved unpredictably under fire. The multi-pronged assaults up the steep exits overwhelmed remaining German cohesion, forcing isolated garrisons to fight without awareness of collapsing strongpoints nearby. Officers inside intact casemates recognized encirclement threats forming rapidly, since breached trenches enabled attackers approaching from angles those fortifications never intended resisting. By late morning, the illusion of invincibility surrounding Omaha's defenses evaporated entirely, because relentless Allied determination surpassed every structural advantage the Atlantic Wall once promised. The 21st Panzer Division began its hesitant advance during the late morning hours, because conflicting orders created debilitating delays that crippled its operational tempo. Major General Edgar Feuchtinger directed movements from distant headquarters. However, his absence from the battlefield created command gaps that slowed essential decision-making. Panzer crews prepared their vehicles across scattered assembly zones, yet Allied air superiority complicated coordination by forcing movements beneath constant threat of strafing attacks. The division's Panthers and Panzer IVs weighed heavily on narrow Norman roads, because logistical challenges disrupted synchronized maneuvers across terrain already congested with retreating infantry units. German officers expected synchronized support from artillery positioned near Cannes. However, communications severed earlier prevented coherent fire planning essential for counterattack effectiveness that morning. The initial armored columns pushed toward the coast cautiously, since reconnaissance reports indicated overwhelming Allied numbers landing steadily across widening beachheads. Luftwaffe assistance proved practically non-existent, because only 2 aircraft reached the invasion corridor despite frantic requests for disruptive strikes against Allied shipping. Tank commanders observed dense Allied air patrols circling above, prompting repeated halts that eroded momentum and undermined the surprise essential for successful armored thrusts. Infantry accompanying the armored formations advanced through hedgerows anxiously, because naval guns offshore demonstrated the capacity to target visible movements with devastating precision. As the division approached designated counterattack routes, Allied paratrooper activity disrupted flanking positions, creating uncertainty that demanded constant reallocation of already limited infantry support. The German armored spearheads finally reached open ground east of the Orne River, yet they discovered Allied anti-tank weapons positioned expertly along expected approach corridors. Panzer units attempted forming assault lines for coordinated thrusts, However, Allied fighter bombers descended rapidly, forcing evasive maneuvers that shattered remaining cohesion completely. Several vehicles burned fiercely in nearby fields, because rockets and cannon fire punctured turret armor effortlessly under continuous aerial bombardment. Tank crews who survived initial strikes abandoned vehicles reluctantly, realizing their division faced overwhelming firepower that nullified traditional maneuver warfare doctrines entirely. The division's elite training provided discipline, although battlefield conditions prevented exploiting tactical strengths that once defined German armored superiority across earlier campaigns. Attempts to regroup south of Caen produced minimal improvement, since road congestion and communication disorder prevented creation of meaningful reserve formations for renewed attacks. Allied units advancing inland strengthened their foothold steadily, ensuring German armored movements lacked both initiative and the element of tactical surprise. German officers recognized their window for counterattack had closed definitively, because Allied supply lines expanded rapidly, supporting unstoppable multinational ground forces. By evening, the 21st Panzer Division retreated toward defensive positions around Caen. Understanding their belated counterattack confirmed Germany's irreversible loss of battlefield initiative. The Luftwaffe entered June 6 with shattered capabilities, because years of attrition had dismantled its operational strength across every continental theater. German airfields in northern France contained limited serviceable aircraft, yet fuel shortages and maintenance failures prevented most remaining fighters from taking flight. Allied planners unleashed 14,674 sorties during the invasion, creating an overwhelming aerial presence that dominated every altitude band above Normandy. German radar operators detected the incoming waves early. However, their reports produced minimal response since available fighters numbered scarcely more than a token force. 2 Luftwaffe aircraft eventually rose into the morning sky, representing the pitiful remnants of an air arm once feared across Europe. The pilots confronted immense formations of Allied bombers and fighters, realizing immediately that any attempt to engage would ensure certain destruction. Allied Mustangs and Thunderbolts patrolled aggressively, creating layered barriers that prevented German aircraft from reaching coastal sectors or vulnerable landing operations. The Luftwaffe's limited presence revealed catastrophic strategic decline, because previous years of unrelenting Allied bombing had destroyed training facilities and crippled fuel production. German commanders understood their inability to contest the air, recognizing that the invasion corridor belonged entirely to enemy forces throughout the day. Attempts to scramble additional fighters failed repeatedly, since technical defects grounded aircraft that lacked spare parts essential for sustained operations. Aircrew reported demoralizing scenes across their bases, observing grounded fighters cannibalized for components as mechanics battled constant shortages. The 2 aircraft that reached Normandy airspace maneuvered cautiously, knowing Allied radar coverage and combat air patrols monitored every movement relentlessly. Seconds after approaching the coastline, Allied fighters intercepted aggressively, forcing immediate withdrawal toward inland positions to avoid fatal engagements. These brief appearances carried symbolic meaning, demonstrating Germany's inability to shield its ground forces from overwhelming Allied aerial supremacy. German infantry along the beaches noted the absence of air support, reinforcing their understanding that defensive positions would face unmitigated bombardment. The Luftwaffe's collapse eliminated opportunities for reconnaissance, denying German commanders accurate intelligence regarding Allied strength and inland advancements. Without air cover, German armored units endured unopposed strafing, suffering losses that crippled movements vital for coordinated counterattacks. The disparity between 2 Luftwaffe aircraft and thousands of Allied sorties illustrated complete dominance that reshaped every battlefield outcome. German officers realized their strategic defeat extended beyond Normandy, acknowledging that air power had become the decisive factor determining operational success. By nightfall, the Luftwaffe conceded its role had ended effectively, marking D-Day as the moment Germany lost the skies forever. German infantry along the Normandy coastline entered the morning believing their fortifications and discipline might contain the initial Allied assault. Within hours, they confronted overwhelming evidence that the enemy possessed resources far exceeding anything Germany could assemble or sustain. Troops observed endless waves of landing craft, noting how destroyed vessels were instantly replaced by additional formations advancing unrelentingly. Machine gunners reported that ammunition expenditure surged rapidly, Yet Allied infantry continued pushing forward supported by ceaseless naval bombardment. German squads attempted organized resistance. However, coordinated defense became impossible while artillery shells pulverized trenches and communication lines repeatedly. Runners carried fragmented orders between units, discovering decimated platoons where few survivors remained capable of maintaining effective resistance. Soldiers realized Allied material superiority expressed itself through uninterrupted firepower that surpassed German expectations regarding duration and intensity. Attempts to reposition reserves faltered quickly because Allied aircraft strafed every visible movement along exposed hedgerows and roadways. Infantrymen witnessed convoys transporting enemy supplies inland continuously, recognizing the strategic implications of such logistical abundance immediately. Small arms teams engaged advancing troops courageously. Yet each defensive success proved temporary due to fresh Allied reinforcements arriving constantly. German officers attempted countermeasures, however shortages of mortar, radios, and medical supplies undermined operational effectiveness disastrously. Field hospitals overflowed within hours, showing how casualty rates exceeded available resources for treatment or evacuation throughout the morning. Infantry units facing armored breakthroughs understood that limited anti-tank assets could not challenge the combined strength of Allied forces. Mortar crews described their positions vanishing under concentrated fire, leaving survivors disoriented while enemy units methodically advanced inland. Retreating squads fought delaying actions, recognizing that holding ground became impossible against adversaries fielding overwhelming mechanized support. German soldiers remarked on the relentless flow of Allied vehicles, contrasting it with their own dwindling fuel supplies sharply. Each observation reinforced a painful realization, showing that Germany confronted an opponent whose industrial output dwarfed every German capability. The concept of halting the invasion eroded steadily, replaced by grim acceptance that strategic defeat had become inevitable. Retreating units carried wounded comrades across roads under constant air threat, demonstrating heroic endurance despite collapsing operational stability. By nightfall, German infantrymen fully comprehended their predicament, understanding they faced not merely armies but an industrial superpower irreversibly shaping the war. German units retreating from Normandy moved eastward in scattered formations, recognizing that their defensive front had collapsed beyond any realistic possibility of restoration. Columns advancing toward the Seine navigated congested roads filled with damaged vehicles, wounded soldiers, and remnants of shattered battalions attempting organized withdrawal. Commanders issued increasingly desperate orders, urging troops to maintain cohesion. Yet Allied air superiority ensured every daylight movement carried immense danger. Pilots flying fighter bombers struck retreating convoys relentlessly, crippling transport columns while preventing any sustained regrouping west of the Seine. Survivors described scenes of devastation, noting overturned trucks, burning fuel carriers, and abandoned artillery lining narrow country roads continually. German officers attempted rerouting maneuvers. However, usable routes dwindled rapidly because Allied ground advances severed critical junctions unexpectedly. Efforts to establish temporary defensive lines failed repeatedly, since depleted battalions lacked ammunition, armored support, and secure communications across disrupted sectors. As troops approached Argentan, they encountered panicked reports describing encirclement risks, prompting hasty decisions that further fragmented retreating formations severely. The tightening convergence of American, British, and Canadian forces created an encirclement zone later known as the Falaise Pocket historically. Inside the forming pocket, German soldiers experienced chaos, observing converging Allied armor cutting escape corridors with overwhelming firepower decisively. Units trapped within the narrowing gap fought desperately, attempting breakout maneuvers under continuous artillery pressure and unrelenting aerial bombardment. Medics struggled with impossible conditions, treating hundreds of casualties without adequate supplies while evacuation routes vanished under enemy fire. Command staff recognized the strategic catastrophe unfolding, understanding that entire divisions faced destruction unless an escape corridor remained momentarily open. Retreating troops moved east through fields and hedgerows, abandoning heavy equipment while carrying only rifles, machine guns, and limited rations. The sight of destroyed panzers reinforced the grim reality that armored strength had been irretrievably lost during the withdrawal phase. Survivors recalled the overwhelming noise of collapsing front lines, hearing artillery, engines, and panicked orders merging into constant turmoil. German morale deteriorated sharply because soldiers recognized the broader implications, seeing veteran formations dissolving as the encirclement tightened rapidly. Falaise became synonymous with irreversible defeat, marking a moment when tactical resistance no longer influenced the strategic trajectory of the war. When the pocket finally closed, nearly 50,000 Germans surrendered, demonstrating the complete operational disintegration of forces retreating toward the Seine. By the time survivors reached the eastern banks, they understood the truth, realizing Germany's armies in France had ceased to exist. By late August 1944, German soldiers recognized that their long-held confidence in tactical skill and fortifications had become irrelevant against overwhelming Allied forces. Infantrymen reflected on months of retreat and repeated defeats, realizing their training could not compensate for the enemy's industrial output and logistical mastery. Atlantic wall bunkers, once symbols of invincibility, now stood empty or destroyed, illustrating the impotence of physical defenses against combined air, naval, and ground firepower. Veteran NCOs recalled engagements at Omaha and Utah beaches, understanding clearly that courage alone could not halt a force sustained continuously by factories and supply chains. Armored units abandoned during the retreat toward the Seine symbolized the technological imbalance, showing that Allied tanks, artillery, and aircraft outmatched German engineering consistently across multiple battlefields. Soldiers read reports of continuous bomber production, including Ford's Willow Run facility producing aircraft at a pace impossible for Germany to counter effectively. The psychological transformation occurred gradually, as men witnessed friends, comrades, and entire divisions surrendered or destroyed systematically while enemy units advanced methodically. Even elite formations, trained for maneuver warfare and defensive ingenuity, could not regain initiative because Allied operational planning neutralized German tactical creativity before it could take effect. Morale deteriorated sharply, replaced by the stark understanding that Germany fought a war determined by industrial power, rather than heroism or battlefield skill alone. Personal diaries and post-war testimonies describe a pervasive sense of futility, as soldiers confronted the existential reality of facing an opponent with inexhaustible resources and strategic flexibility. Every defensive position abandoned reinforced this new understanding, because terrain advantages, fortified strongpoints, and local improvisation failed against massed firepower and aerial supremacy. Heinrich Severloh's accounts at Omaha exemplified individual heroism rendered irrelevant, demonstrating that even extraordinary personal effort could not influence a battle predetermined by material imbalance. Officers attempted to explain continued resistance, yet the disparity between hope and reality became apparent across every echelon of command. From frontline platoons to divisional headquarters. By the final stages of the Falaise Pocket, surrender, retreat, or annihilation became inevitable choices, proving decisively that Germany's military paradigm no longer corresponded with modern combined arms warfare. The collapse of belief extended beyond tactics, reaching ideological conviction as soldiers realized that technological, industrial, and numerical supremacy, rather than doctrine or courage, determined victory. Historians note that this awareness permanently altered German soldiers' perception of warfare, redefining defeat as a consequence of systemic inadequacy rather than mere misfortune. Even as men attempted rearguard actions, they faced the incontrovertible truth that their enemy could replace losses instantly while Germany struggled to sustain minimal operational continuity. By confronting the totality of Allied superiority, German soldiers internalized a profound strategic lesson. Bravery alone could never compensate for industrial inferiority on the modern battlefield. This moment marked both the culmination of Normandy's destruction and the irreversible shift in Germany's capacity to wage effective war, confirming Allied dominance decisively. The collapse of the German belief system became a defining feature of late 1944, illustrating how material and logistical superiority ultimately determined the outcome of World War II.